On September 11th, 2001, there's a nasty attack on our country that ended up taking the lives of nearly 3,000 people. Some of them just doing their jobs, some of them trying to save lives, and some of them even went down like heroes in that Pennsylvania field. In this video, we're going to be getting down to the bottom of what actually happened, the events that led up to the attacks. We're going to be breaking down the attacks of what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. We're going to be tearing down the narrative that you've been hearing for years, and we're going to be getting down to the bottom. And the main question of the video, was 9/11 an inside job? Well, the answer is yes, but if you want a detailed analysis of why that is, stay tuned. You're not going to want to miss this. Disclaimer, everything in this program is a far-right conspiracy theory and is definitely filled with lies. Believe everything you see on CNN, MSNBC, or if you saw the debates last night, ABC News is a good one. Vote for Harris. COVID is real. Epstein totally killed himself. Women are good drivers. They definitely don't belong in the kitchen. Stop ingesting eggs, red meat, raw milk instead. Eat gluten-free vegan foods. And lastly, get vaccinated and get a weekly booster shot to fight COVID. Viewer discretion is advised. Now that I can say whatever I want without getting sued, let's get into this. Before we get into the attacks on 9/11, we're going to build up to the events that happened before 9/11. And the furthest event that I can trace back to 9/11 itself is the first attack on the North Tower of the World Trade Center in February 26th of 1993, when Al-Qaeda attempted to bomb the North Tower with a bomb van, taking the lives of 6 people, including a pregnant lady. The bomb's intent was to collapse the tower from the basement and collapse it all the way down, similar to what we saw on the terrible day. And that's the official story. But that's not what really happened. Let me introduce you to Ahmed Salem. He is an FBI informant, and he testified in the witness trial, stating that the bomb that was used in the terrorist attack on the Twin Tower, or on the North Tower of the World Trade Center, was actually built under FBI surveillance. And he even admitted in court that there was an unnamed higher up in the FBI that even played with the idea of giving them fake powder to use as for their bomb to entrap them into doing a crime so they could arrest them or whatever reason. And they ended up declining that option, and they ended up just killing 6 people, including a pregnant woman, for no reason. And this isn't just a he said, she said story either. This was even reported by the New York Times. You can look it up. New York Times, 10/28/1993. You can see more details on it. You can read that whole article yourself. One of the things America is known for is that they use false flag attacks to get themselves in war. They're like an angry kid that wants to get in a fight, but he wants to only get in a fight when it's justified. In the Spanish-American War, there's a news story where a Mexican ship, or a Spanish ship, shot down one of our civilian ships and killed a bunch of innocent people. Wasn't true at all. It ended up actually being a ship filled with weapons. It was a weapons ship, and the Spanish people were just doing the right thing. The Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam is another example. Operation Northwoods. The only reason why that didn't get us into a war is because Kennedy is not an idiot. And Kennedy was even pissed at the CIA. If you don't know what Operation Northwoods is, basically the CIA murdered like 2,000 people, similar to 9/11. And they blamed it on Cuba. But like I said, Kennedy didn't fall for it. And even Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor is another example of an attack like this. Because Pearl Harbor was perfectly preventable. This is like the example I brought up earlier where the bully, the guy who just wants to fight the bully, but he's waiting for the bully to hit him first. The president got news on his desk that Japan was going to attack Pearl Harbor. And he didn't read it because, quote, it wasn't prioritized. The intel was not prioritized, causing the attack on Pearl Harbor. So, like I said, the U.S. has a history in using false flag attacks to get into wars. So why not do it again? You know what I mean? Osama bin Laden was the man blamed for the attacks on September 11, 2001. But before that, he was a CIA asset in the 80s. And after that, he was also blamed for an attack on the U.S. Embassy in Africa. The CIA, FBI, and Mossad, and many other, like MI6, for example, too, all of these government agencies tried to find Osama bin Laden and failed. Yet some random ABC reporter, for whatever reason, was able to get a sit-down interview face-to-face with Osama bin Laden. And the government still couldn't find him for whatever reason. By the way, this is from 1998 to 2001. They've been looking for Osama bin Laden. And they couldn't find him. They literally just could not find him. They couldn't find him, yet some random ABC News reporter was able to find him. It's just kind of crazy to me. I know why that is, though. Because it's no fault of the agency. The agency, it wasn't like the agency wasn't trying. The agency didn't want to. Because Osama bin Laden was their golden boy. They already had bin Laden as public enemy number one. So if they're going to do a future attack later on in the future, they could just blame it on Osama bin Laden and use him to spark up a war that is completely unnecessary, like their previous false flag wars that we've also started in the past. But here's where the story gets very interesting. This is when we start getting into the actual 9/11 stuff. So, a few years before the events of 9/11 took place, there were many Israelis pretending to be art students. These art students had unrestricted access to the North Tower during the closing hours and have even reported to be in other federal buildings. They were in two separate groups, the G team and the E team. This would explain how explosives could have made it into the Twin Towers with the controlled demolition, which we'll get into later. The Twin Towers, when they fell, it's very obvious it was a controlled demolition, but this is going to prove it even furthermore that that's what happened that day. Carl Cameron, he even did a 4-part miniseries on the art students. He was trying to find the answer to the mystery, and conveniently, the art student documentary that he made was deleted off of Fox, and I don't know if you could still find it. You could find like bits and pieces of it, but besides that, you cannot find that video anywhere. You cannot find the 4-part series anywhere, to my knowledge. It is nowhere to be found. It's not on the Internet Archives. It's not on the Wayback Machine or whatever. You literally cannot find that thing anywhere, which makes me think that it had some truth to it. The E team. This is the team in the thumbnail of my video. If you look in the top right-hand corner of my video thumbnail, you'll see there's the E team, and then right exactly where the E team thing was, that's where the crater of the plane that hit the tower was. These guys typically conducted business on the upper floors, and coincidentally, exactly where the plane hit, which is just the greatest coincidence I've ever seen in my life. If you ever read Jack Reacher books, you would know that coincidences are a very rare thing. We'll get to the ridiculousness of the plane even penetrating the Twin Tower later. The name of the E-Team is still not known to this day, but it's most likely that the name of the team is the Explosives Team, and here's why. The G-Team. The G-Team, also known as the Gelatin Team, gelatin being a high explosive material, did a whole construction project inside of the Twin Towers. To my knowledge, nobody was paid for this construction project. It was all volunteer work, which means either people are getting paid under the table or there's something weird going on here, because there's a construction project being done on the Twin Towers, no one's getting paid for it. But they had a whole thing, they had a whole setup, they had a whole the sketchbook on different things, and the sketchbook is just super weird to look at when you look at it now. By the way, the story of the art students has never been solved. There's no conclusion to it, and there's never been a follow-up on it, which is a weird trend within the 9/11 story that we will learn as we go through the video. That's just a weird trend where 9/11 stories just go unknown. They just remain unsolved, and there's never a follow-up. And it's going to get really weird when we get to the one thing that was never followed up on, which I still find super concerning to this day. Larry Silverstein, he's an interesting character in the whole 9/11 story. So he's the man who owns the World Trade Centers. You see, many of the buildings in the World Trade Center were built with asbestos, meaning that they had to be torn down and rebuilt to code. Because this is around the time when asbestos is starting to become like super bad, and you got to replace it. Especially with the amount of asbestos in the World Trade Center, or in the Twin Towers, they had to be taken down and they had to be rebuilt. And I don't know if you know how much that costs, but it's a lot of money. Okay, it's a lot of money to tear down a building with a controlled explosion, have someone clean up the mess you just made, and then to rebuild the building. It is a super expensive, super tedious process that isn't worth it. Larry Silverstein upped his insurance policy to only covering terrorist attacks. And one of the stipulations in his contract, in his insurance contract, is that in order for him to get his money, the entire building had to collapse. The entire building had to drop, like collapse completely. Which makes the whole Israeli students thing, planting explosives, even more viable and legit. He needed a building, the government needed a terrorist attack to start a war. It's like the perfect match in heaven, except for it's not good. This would also explain why he would allow the art students to have unrestricted access to his buildings. Larry Silverstein and two of his children work at the World Trade Center. They worked at the Twin Towers where the attack was going to take place. And they all happened to miss work on the same exact day when the World Trade Center and the Twin Towers were getting attacked. How convenient. By the way, these guys never miss work. These guys weren't the guys who were calling out a lot, going on vacation a lot. These guys barely ever call out of work to my knowledge. And all of a sudden they call out of work the one day the terrorist attack happens to happen. Like I said, coincidences, like genuine coincidences, are very, very rare. And to push my point even further, Larry Silverstein won his money. Not only did he win enough money in the payout to build a new building, but he actually profited. Larry Silverstein built the biggest building in the United States and in United States history. And he did it while profiting off of it. You're telling me he didn't do that on purpose? You're telling me that a businessman like Larry Silverstein wouldn't do that on purpose? You don't believe that he would? Can somebody say insurance fraud? FBI warns of the attacks. So the FBI agents, Robert Wright, Colleen Rowley, and Sibel Edmonds, they're investigating a potential Arab terrorist attack, which was actually Mossad posing as Arab terrorists. Whatever, it's fine. They didn't know any better. They were met with retaliation threats, and they were even made fun of for their investigation. And Edmonds was even told to lie. So Edmonds was a translator. He translated scripts and things like that. And he's even told to lie about translations and to misdirect the investigation of this terrorist attack. Their investigation was blocked before the attacks, and when they were proven correct, their investigation was blocked after the attacks as well. By the way, everything I'm saying in this video is verifiably true. You can look up every single thing I'm talking about. All of it's true. You can find all of it. It's all on the internet. I spent like the last week researching all of this stuff. On September 10th, 2001, the Pentagon audit, they discovered that $2.3 trillion were unaccounted for. Okay, they didn't know where it went. They were gone. The next day, the part of the building that happened to be responsible for the accounting gets hit by a plane. We'll get to that later. Now we are on to the main event of this story, the attacks themselves. We finally made it to the attacks themselves. We're like 20 minutes in this video. On September 11, 2001, at 10:46 p.m. Eastern Time. American Airlines Flight 11 hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. Now, this is the part of the story that completely makes it all fall apart for me, besides everything else that also makes it fall apart for me. But this is like the main thing. Okay, we're supposed to believe that a hollow aircraft went through one of the strongest buildings ever built in human history. Mind you, airplanes like the 747, the ones that are used in the attacks, they've literally been destroyed by flocks of birds. And you're telling me it went through an entire building that's like one of the strongest buildings ever built in human history? I've literally seen planes get stopped by poles. They'll hit a pole. Their wing will like hit a pole and just stop moving. It's just, and you expect me to believe it went through the freaking the north-south tower? I don't believe you. I'm sorry. I just don't. Second attack. United Airlines Flight 175 hit the South Tower of the World Trade Center at 9:03 a.m. We have the same problem with this plane as we do with the other plane. How did it penetrate the building? The Pentagon. The Pentagon. This is the fun one that people like to try to explain their way out of. American Airlines 77 hit the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia at 9:37 a.m. But the Pentagon being struck at all makes no sense. How in the world did it even get hit? Like, if you look at the angle, like the Pentagon, I don't know, let's just say, here's my mug, right? If this is the Pentagon, right, the bottom part, like right here, gets hit. Okay, you're probably seeing a picture on your screen right now, actually. The bottom part gets hit. How does a 747 flying nearly right low to the ground, hitting the Pentagon, only creating a super tiny hole that makes no sense? If you compare a 747 to like an actual person, they're ginormous. I've been on one, dude. They're ginormous. They're huge. Remind the fact that there's a pole. If you look at one of the pictures, there's literally a pole standing that should not have been standing if a plane actually hit the Pentagon. Like, how is that pole still standing there? What, did the freaking plane turn into Kitty Pryde for like 3 seconds and just morph through the pole and then hit the tower? Like, come on. Also, like I said before, if you look at the crash site, the hole is so small, there's no way a plane hit that and made that dent. If you look at the dent on the World Trade Center, the plane gash, it's like huge, right? And then we go to the Pentagon, it's just like this. It's like a super microscopic hole. It makes no sense. It just does not work for me. I will never believe it. A missile hit the Pentagon. That's what actually happened. Now we're moving on to the collapse of the tower. So the problem that I have with the collapse, though, is just scientifically it makes no sense. And that's what we're going to be going over in the next few slides. How can the top of a building, right, the top 1 or 10 to 20% of a building crush the rest of it? We're talking like 38,000 tons, landing on nearly 200,000 plus tons. And you're going to expect me that 30-something thousand is going to crush everything? No, that doesn't work. You can never recreate that, ever. You would never be able to recreate that in a million years with any material. If you took bricks and you did the same thing that happened on 9/11 with a bunch of bricks, it's not doing that. It's going to tip. It's just how physics work. Or it'll just remain standing and have the debris on top of it. It's not believable to me that the towers collapse perfectly straight like this with like no resistance at all. I don't believe you. The speed in which the towers collapsed also makes no sense, okay? The speed in which the towers collapse literally is as if there's no resistance at all. Like, if I were to pick up my water here and drop it, the towers collapsed at this speed. This is the speed in which the towers collapse. And this is only experiencing air resistance. It's not experiencing 200,000 tons worth of resistance. The only way that that's even possible is with a controlled demolition. Okay, you've probably heard the saying, jet fuel can't melt steel. That saying originated with this event altogether. It's been used to discredit 9/11 truthers because people like blacksmiths will be like, yeah, the steel won't melt, but it'll weaken, blah, 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 blah. But no, we have actual evidence that the steel that day actually melted. And we know that jet fuel can't melt the steel. So what did? Not only do we have eyewitness accounts saying that they've picked up parts of the wreckage and seen pools and rivers of melted steel, but we have video evidence right here, right now on your screen, that it happened. And on top of all of that, the man, the myth, the legend himself, welcome back to the show, John Barnett, God rest his soul, a study from John Barnett himself, documented by FEMA in Appendix C of their BPAT, reports also proving this. So their report on this also proved that this happened. The FEMA report also states that sulfur residue was found on the steel, which, by the way, sulfur makes steel easier to melt. It makes the melting point of steel and different metals lower than they usually are. So that explained why the jet fuel can burn the steel. But who put the sulfur in the building? On top of that, you can actually see squibs. As the tower's collapsing, you can see squibs, which is that like smoke coming out of the building as it's crashing down. You can see squibs. It's these like small streams of, it's small jets of smoke. And the one thing that results in seeing squibs is a controlled demolition. So this just proves the point even further. The Pennsylvania field. This is where the heroes went down and they ended up crashing the plane, overtaking the cockpit, whatever. Well, there's a few problems with this story as well. 10 a.m. on September 11th, Flight 93 was hijacked, and the people on board ended up taking it back over and crashed the plane. This was the flight that crashed into that Pennsylvania field. There's some conspiracy theorists out there that say that the plane parts were never recovered. That's just genuinely false. You could see that the plane parts right there. They're just clear as day. So they're pretty evident that they're there. The problem with this, though, is the story. This is also the plane that's been theorized to have been shot down by the government, which I don't know how to feel about that either. It could have been, might not have been, who knows. What I do know is there happened to be a military training that is practically identical to the 9/11 attacks on the same exact day, so it could have been part of that, who knows. One of the most important details of this whole thing is that phone calls in 2001 were being made from the airplane to the ground. Like, that's just, to me, I don't believe it. I don't believe that for 5 seconds. Unless they're maybe using radio phones, which I doubt. This was a flight headed towards Cleveland. I don't know why it was heading towards Cleveland, Ohio. But then it ended up changing directions all of a sudden without a hijacking ever being reported. Although the 9/11 Commission had flight deck equipment, and the results shown that the passengers never actually made it in the cockpit. This is just that weird, obscure 9/11 story that no one really knows a lot about and that hasn't really been investigated. And once again, hasn't had a follow-up. Like most of the 9/11 story. Building 7 is the biggest tell that the attack on the Twin Towers was an inside job. It was the third building that collapsed on 9/11. But this is a weird collapse because no plane hit Building 7. Like no plane hit Building 7. People were like claiming that debris hit it and that's what made it collapse or whatever, even though it fell with literally no resistance, like I said earlier. Like that's how fast it was falling constantly. For the first 100 feet, it was like, thump, as if there's no resistance. Even though there should have been, seeing as, you know, it had a bunch of floors below it. Like 40-something floors below it. Building 7 is actually very similar to the Meridian Bank building, the fire that took place on that building. Yet, there's a completely different result. The Meridian Bank building is still standing, even though it was on fire for literally 18 freaking hours. Yet, Building 7 just falls apart randomly one day. That's just kind of sus to me. The Dancing Israelis. This is a fun fact that many people don't know, but it's becoming a more popular theory recently, and more popular thing. And it's even considered anti-Semitic if you talk about this and you look it up. All the articles are like anti-Semitic attack, anti-Semitic attack, anti-Semitic attack. So, I guess let's be racist today. Screw it. So, the Dancing Israelis was a group of 5 guys, 2 of them being Mossad agents. They were arrested, and the police found $4,000 of cash on them, 2 passports, and they were held in prison for 74 days. A woman who called the police on them saw them dancing around laughing while recording the 9/11 attacks. They were recording the Twin Towers being hit and on fire, and they were like jumping around dancing for whatever reason. Before we get off this topic, have you ever heard of Donald Trump saying that he saw people in New Jersey dancing and celebrating? He saw Arab people dancing and cheering on the 9/11 attacks. These were the people he was talking about. So when everyone's making fun of him saying that it never happened, yes it did, and this is who he's talking about. He's talking about the Dancing Israelis. By the way, this is another story that never got a follow-up. Big shocker. The hijackers' IDs. So the hijackers, as you know, the terrorists that crashed in the Twin Towers, somehow their IDs were recovered from the crash site. I don't know how that's even possible. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Shortly after 9/11 attacks, the government recycled the metal before investigators could really find out what happened. But they didn't get to it quick enough, because we still have evidence that the steel was melted and misshapen, and that there was some foul play at hand when it came to this. Now imagine the evidence that we would have if the metal was never recycled and never sent to China and India. It would have been pretty nuts, honestly, to see all that. This was a criminal investigation case of immense importance, and the investigators couldn't even access any of the evidence. And out of the investigation that was allowed to be done, it was heavily shackled by bureaucratic restrictions. This further cements the idea that 9/11 was, in fact, an inside job. Hijacker was actually found alive. So on September 26th, the BBC posted an article saying that the hijackers, or that one of the hijackers, I'll call him hijackers with quote because probably didn't do it. I'd rather call him a victim of identity theft. He was actually found alive. He claimed that he left the United States over a year before the attacks. This is a story that not only the BBC has tried hard to denounce, but it's hard to not believe it since there's never a follow-up on this either. You notice a trend? The attack on the Mexican parliament. On October 10th, 2001, 2 Israelis were caught and detained inside of the parliament building in San Lazaro in Mexico City. They were in possession of automatic pistols, hand grenades, electrical wiring, explosive equipment, and each had Pakistani passports. Sounds familiar? Does anyone else find it odd that the country that refused to join the war on terror was nearly bombed? Their parliament was nearly bombed. You think if this bombing was successful, if people would actually believe that the story was true, that Pakistanis actually broke in with automatic guns and started shooting people and bombing the place? Do you think that could be a what if in American history? Do you think Mexico would have joined the military operations if this was successful? All in order to fight terrorism? Beverly Eckert lost her husband, Sean Rooney, during the attacks on the Twin Towers. She was an advocate that fought for the answers, the real answers on the 9/11 story. She didn't believe it. She didn't buy it. She's one of the founders of the 9/11 Truth movement. She turned down government-sanctioned multi-million-dollar settlement, which included a hush clause in pursuit of her lawsuits. She famously wrote that my silence cannot be bought. So it's pretty based, honestly. Just a few days after meeting Barack Obama, just right after meeting with her, she died along with 48 others in a plane crash. Which is just kind of weird, in my opinion. And this brings us to the end. What was the point of 9/11 being an inside job? What's the whole plan? Let's wrap this whole thing up. What would be the point of George Bush and Dick Cheney doing this attack? Well, duh, it's to fight terrorism. Obviously. What, you thought this conspiracy video was going to have some conspiratorial, deep state, New World Order ending? No. Okay? It was all in order to find the weapons of mass destruction that definitely existed and that we definitely found within the 20-something years that we were over there for. It's not like we were over there trying to fight a war over oil. It's not like George Bush owned an oil company. Duh, come on. It's not like he did that. It's not like Dick Cheney, the vice president at the time, had a construction company called Halliburton that happened to get no-bid contracts on all of the cities destroyed by American bombs in the Middle East. It's not like that ever happened either. It's not like 9/11 was some big money-making scheme by some of the richest and most powerful people in America. Come on, guys. Smarten up. It was to fight terrorism. Anyway, that's going to be the end of my video. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, I make videos like this all the time. Hit the subscribe button, post notifications. You'll know anytime I upload. If you like this video, give it a like, comment. I want to hear your thoughts down below, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.